Breaking news this morning, an earthquake hit parts of East Tennessee this morning just after 9. The USGS reports that it was a 4.1 magnitude earthquake. Now, Aaron, can you share a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, Sam. The truth of it is that a magnitude of 4.1 is just rather rare to see occur in East Tennessee. We actually see likely hundreds of earthquakes in East Tennessee each year, but they are not near magnitude 4.1 and often go undetected. So to see an earthquake of this magnitude unexpectedly really is a shocker to many. The last time we saw a magnitude similar to this was in December of 2018, so it's been quite some years, and we are believing that this might go down in record as one of the top 5 strongest earthquakes felt here in East Tennessee. And we are also hearing, right, Sam, that it's throughout Atlanta. People are giving reports and lots of states nearby.
That is absolutely right. We've had a lot of viewers write in and share video with us. We're going to show that video in a second. But Aaron touched on something that's really interesting, is that this was the strongest magnitude we've felt in quite a while, but it is not rare to feel earthquakes here in East Tennessee. Now, we do have earthquakes that are often below 2.5 magnitude, and honestly, we don't usually report those, but we do have 2.3, 2, 2.5, all of those reported since 2022. Now, we do have our meteorologist, Cassie Nall. She is currently out of the state, but she is able to join us for a phone call to talk a little bit more about this. So we're going to take her on the phone and ask her a few questions. Cassie, are you there?
I am. Good morning, Sam.
Good morning, Cassie. Man, you leave the state and some crazy things have happened.
Yeah, and it starts shaking around. And by the way, welcome Erin for her first day on air.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, I mean, I think the joke is this has been quite a shock to me. Not something we were really expecting to happen today.
Well, tell me, what do you guys want to know about earthquakes in East Tennessee?
Absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about how this is not necessarily rare to have an earthquake, but maybe something of this magnitude is a little out of the ordinary. Can you kind of talk to us about that?
Yes, I can. So in East Tennessee, we live in the East Tennessee seismic zone. So these are ancient fault lines because the Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest mountains in the entire world. And so the fault lines aren't really traceable in these really, really old rocks. So we can't attribute earthquakes in East Tennessee to any specific single fault like you can in California to the San Andreas Fault. But we do have hundreds of earthquakes each year here in East Tennessee along those little ancient fault lines. As Sam was mentioning just a few minutes ago, most of them are very weak and so weak that you actually can't feel them. So we typically don't report about them. However, we have had some stronger quakes in our history here in East Tennessee. In fact, the strongest one on record was a 4.7 magnitude earthquake back in 1973 near Maryville and Alcoa. That one did do a little bit of damage there. We had a 4.5 in 1928 in Greenville, and then most recently, compared to the magnitude that we had today, we had a 4.4 magnitude in 2018 in Decatur. We also felt the shaking from that one in the Knoxville area. I remember feeling that one. And we also had a 3.8 magnitude in 2020 up in the La Follette area on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Also remember feeling that one. So earthquakes are not uncommon, but strong earthquakes like the one we had today are. In fact, this one is tied for the 5th strongest on record in East Tennessee at 4.1 magnitude. The shaking was felt all across our viewing area and even as far south as into parts of North Georgia. Thankfully, we haven't had any reports of any damage in our area so far, Sam.
That is absolutely right. And you mentioned that there haven't been any reports of damage, and we did say that we'd reached out to the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, and I want to read part of our most recent communication with Corporal Bengal. Now, he says that he spoke with dispatch and they did receive a couple calls from residents who were just asking questions to see if they could confirm it was an earthquake. He says there's not been any damage, injuries, or anything else reported thus far. Now, Cassie, for people who maybe felt this earthquake and are concerned, unsure of what to do, if we do feel an earthquake, what are the best steps to take?
Well, we don't, again, typically have ones that are strong enough to cause damage, but when we get something above about a 3.5, we'll start to feel it, and above a 4 is when you're going to notice some things shaking around. So, like, objects may fall off of shelves and small things like that. The best thing that you can do is try to get into a sturdy doorway or maybe under a table or something like that, just in case anything that is falling isn't gonna fall on you necessarily. But again, this isn't a common problem in our area, so we don't want people to worry too much about it. Today, like I said, was one of the top 5 strongest we've ever had recorded, and we did okay. So that's the good news.
Absolutely, yes. Again, no damage reported so far. We are keeping an eye out for that. But again, Loudoun County is where this originated, and we heard from LCSO, the sheriff's office there, that there has been no damage, no major issues, so nothing to be too concerned about. And the National Weather Service in Morristown did say that for anyone wondering about aftershocks, our fellow scientists at the USGS forecast only 23% chance to see a magnitude 3 or higher aftershock within the week. They say, remember, the scale is logarithmic, so a 3.0 is 10 times weaker than a 4.0, like what we experienced this morning. Cassie, can you maybe help kind of contextualize that a little bit, maybe explain what aftershocks are?
Yes, so sometimes earthquakes, well, I like to describe it kind of like you're cracking your knuckles on your hand. So you crack one knuckle and then another one kind of feels a little off, so you want to crack another knuckle. Half of the country than it is compared out west.
Gotcha. And Rebecca, I want to ask, in case there's any people who are worried about something like this occurring again, it's not possible for scientists to predict something like this to happen, right? It was just a total shock to us.
Yes, we have not found a way to accurately forecast earthquakes at this time. Typically, if you have an earthquake, sometimes scientists can know the characteristics of that particular fault line, and that can help them know, like out in California, if they have one earthquake, they can typically kind of forecast that there may be more coming. In East Tennessee, we cannot do that. And so, no way to tell if there will be another one or if there won't be and how long it will be between them here in our area.
Yeah, and luckily magnitudes of 4.1 are just not very common around here. So I don't think that this is something East Tennessee residents are really going to have to worry about. But again, it was just such a surprise, and the footage we're starting to get in. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's quite amazing to watch.
It really is. I've seen some of the doorbell camera videos that have been being sent into our newsroom. We've been sharing them on our social media pages. And you hear the dogs start to bark and people going, what in the world is going on right now? We were flooded with emails and messages of people saying, I think I just felt an earthquake. And you were correct. Anybody who's at home going, right? Yes, you did.
Absolutely. Yes, well, Cassie, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. Again, I know you're not even in Tennessee right now, so we really just appreciate you joining us and sharing with us, of course. I know there will be more to talk about in the future, so we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Have a great day.
You too. Well, again, this was a 4.1 magnitude earthquake that happened, and we do want to show some old video that we have. We went through our archives and pulled some of the footage that we have from the past. And first off, we're going to show you a 1973 newspaper clipping. So as you can see, it says the quake shakes up area and residents, and this is from 1973. So this was a 4.7 magnitude earthquake that happened in Alcoa. Also a 1987 earthquake newspaper that was a 4.3 in Vonore.
Yep, and that 4.7, Sam, is Important to note that that was the strongest that we have ever felt here in East Tennessee. So just a couple points away from what we felt today, but you can only imagine the difference between this 4.1 and 4.7. I mean, these news articles, they're very interesting to read because things like this don't happen too frequently around here.
Exactly. So that was 1987. Now we want to show you 1998. We actually did a story on an earthquake that happened then. So let's go ahead and listen into what it was like in 1998.
And over here, I have old flue covers that I worried about.
When the earth moved this morning, so did Mary Ellen Howard's bed. When the shaking stopped, she started thinking about her antiques.
I was just scared to death. I just came running down the stairs to check everything, and I looked around and I said, you know, everything's still up in place.
The quake did set off alarms in Oak Ridge's National Laboratory. The shaking automatically shut off the research reactor. Oak Ridge officials say no one was in any danger and operations are back to normal. The town's still talking about the trembling ground, those who knew about it anyway.
Usually you'd think you'd feel something. If it was a strong enough earthquake, you'd think we'd feel it, but we didn't feel nothing.
I don't know, you just don't expect earthquakes to happen here.
Actually, East Tennessee does get a good number of earthquakes. The average is about one per week, but most are so small we never feel them.
But earthquakes of this size occur somewhere in the region 2 to 3 times a year.
This is how the quake looked to seismic sensors. UT professor Rick Williams says we're in one of the 2 largest seismic zones east of the Rocky Mountains, but he says we don't need to brace for the big one just yet.
We could have an earthquake much larger, about a magnitude 4.5 at any time. Still, that's not large enough to be life-threatening.
From time to time we've gotten them, but nothing like this.
Mary Ellen Howard hopes it's a long time before something like this happens again. In Oak Ridge, Laura Hatch, Action 10 News.
Well, and right after that earthquake happened, I did reach out to the University of Memphis Center for Earthquake Research and Information, and we had the chance to speak with an associate there who was able to contextualize some of what this means. Tell us a little bit more about this earthquake. So I did an interview with him, and we'll listen to that interview live to answer some of our questions.
So can you tell us just a little bit about what happened this morning?
Well, this morning we had a magnitude 4.1 earthquake near, what's the Greenback or Greenville, and it was the first one we've really had that strong since 2003 with the Fort Payne, Alabama earthquake of that year, which was of a similar magnitude. The felt reports are just off the chart in terms of several. One of my fellow scientists texted me, said they had over 20,000 felt reports so far.
Wow. Okay. So how does that, because my understanding, I guess, can you talk about like this region? Do we typically see earthquakes, but they're just not as strong? Is that right?
Yes, the East Tennessee seismic zone is an active seismic zone that pops off small earthquakes of smaller magnitudes all the time, but nobody notices them. We have a seismic network there to monitor events there, and we record them all the time. This one was a feelable earthquake and got everybody's attention.
Okay, and I know the USGS initially reported it was 3.5 magnitude, and then it jumped up to 4.1. Is there any, I guess, could that magnitude raise even higher, or are we fully confident that
No, it's been revised. What happens is you get an automatic solution, then it goes through our analyst who's an expert with the network, and then what happens there is what you get is a revision to the proper magnitude. The earthquake itself happened in the center of our seismic network there, so we got good data on it. It wasn't on the periphery or off on out at a distance where you have trouble trying to analyze it. This was smack dab in the middle of our seismic instrumentation and made it not easier but better to analyze.
Okay, and so when it comes to aftershock, can you maybe explain what that is and if we might see that, if we already have?
I don't know. The thing is, aftershocks are smaller earthquakes of lesser magnitude, of course, that trail off after the main shock of an earthquake. I do not know if we will see such a phenomenon with this earthquake or not. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't.
Okay. Is there any sort of timeline where that would happen? Like, does it happen usually an hour after, or is it totally dependent?
It's totally independent of time. It's sort of like why we cannot predict earthquakes. If we could do that, you'd be ready for it and have a forecast and all that, and we're just not there with that at all, period.
Right. Well, and that probably leads into my next question, which was going to be looking at the future. Does what happened today with this earthquake predict anything or say anything about the future of maybe if we'll start seeing more, or we just don't know?
We just don't know. It's well within the parameters of what the East Tennessee seismic zone does in terms of seismic activity. And every few years, you'll get a good feelable earthquake, and this is your good feelable earthquake.
And when it comes to people who might have felt that earthquake, is there any, I guess, advice if someone does feel an earthquake of best practices or what people should just generally know?
Well, the best practice is to treat it sort of like an earthquake drill and treat it like a stronger earthquake. Do what you would do for a stronger event. Get under a piece of furniture, ride it out. You can also act as a citizen scientist and go to the Did You Feel It webpage and put in, they have a questionnaire that you type in, and it will assign your location and the data that you type in on effect. That helps us to fine tune things like hazard mapping and such for seismic activity. Site response is a very important thing to what we do, and getting the site response from people is very helpful.
And so when it comes to your work that you do and other experts in this field, now that this earthquake has happened, kind of what does your work look like? Like, do you spend days kind of studying it, or does this influence what you do at all?
Well, because this is all recorded, we have in some ways the leisure of going back and poring over the data in more slow motion because to us, to you, it's an earthquake. To us, it's data. And because seismic activity illuminates the substructure of the region, think of it as a sort of a one earthquake, not ultrasound, one earthquake at a time. And it gives us data that we can help analyze the area and the region and what it is all about.
Okay, interesting. And then when it comes to damage from earthquakes of this size, I was reading something that said that like windows typically don't break until you get to a 4.4 magnitude. So I know it's been a while since we've had an earthquake of this magnitude here in this area, but do you know about, like, would you expect an earthquake like what we saw this morning to cause a lot of damage or not so much?
Uh, not damage, but it will rattle everything. And if well, I mean, the only thing would be something on a shelf, right on the periphery of the shelf, perilously balanced to the point it gets that little bit of push to push it off the edge. But I know that people were rattled by it. I know it shook people very well. And I know that from the Did You Feel It reports because it's being flooded by it. I know your phone system is pretty well sunk right now due to everybody calling in about it. Oh, one thing I'd like to say is if people are going to report it, don't report it to social media because it does not, social media doesn't record the data. If you go to Did You Feel It, it records the data and your experiences for future use by the scientific community. But when you throw it up on social media, Facebook, et cetera, and so forth, it goes off into the void and we can't use it, unfortunately.
And speaking about that, why is it so important to record this data? Like, why does it matter?
It matters because every bit of data counts to further analyze all of seismic activity. There's no such thing as wasted data. I've run into in the 25 years that I've been at it that where you gather data on an event thinking it doesn't matter. Then a few years later, somebody finds a way to analyze that data where it gives you new insights on seismic activity. So data's not wasted. You've just not figured out a way to analyze it yet and make it of good use.
That totally makes sense. I love the way you put that. Well, you answered all of my questions. Now, is there anything that I didn't ask that you think we should talk about or anything else that you think is important to know? Or do you think we kind of, I'm sure we could talk about it all day, but is there anything?
Yes, ma'am, we could. Well, the people, should be aware we have seismic zones. We have ours in West Tennessee, the New Madrid seismic zone. And occasionally we get feelable earthquakes here also. We have a few more than you guys get. But at the same time, your seismic zone is active, and on occasion, you will get a feelable earthquake. And it's just part of nature.
Part of nature, nothing to be alarmed about.
Nothing to be alarmed about. It's normal seismic activity, and every once in a while, it will announce itself to remind us that we have seismic zones.
And last question for you. I should have asked this at the very beginning, but for someone who maybe is not familiar with an earthquake and what causes it, can you just kind of break that down in very basic terminology?
In basic terms, what you have is a part of the crust that's under stress with a flaw in it, which is called a fault for basic terms. And that fault reaches a point of stress to the point that it breaks a little bit. The more breakage you get, the higher magnitude you get. And what you had was a small break, small little rupture on the fault, very finite, that caused a magnitude 4 earthquake, or 4.1 to be technical.
And when we look at that scale, I guess what is considered, in terms of magnitude, what is considered like a big earthquake? I know it's all kind of relative.
Well, the scale is logarithmic. If you remember in your high school math classes about logarithms, each number is roughly 10 times stronger than the number beneath it. 4 is 10 times stronger than a 3, a 5 is 10 times stronger than a 4. When you're getting above magnitude 4 into the magnitude 5 range is when you get light damage. Magnitude 6 is where you're really getting damage. 7, like the New Madrid earthquakes, you get a lot of damage. But each bump of the scale bumps up your effect and what can cause damage.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. That was really helpful. I mean, like I said, you answered all of my questions, and I know this was on incredibly short notice, so I really appreciate it.
Well, ma'am, if you have any more questions, just let me know, and I'll be glad to answer. And if I don't know them, somebody at SERI will know them, and I'll direct it to the person who can answer it for you.
All right. You are awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you again to Nathan Moran at the University of Memphis. Sam, I think you and him answered some really important questions. And in case you're just joining us, at 9:05 Eastern this morning, we experienced a 4.1 magnitude earthquake here in East Tennessee. This is going to be ranked in one of our top 5 strongest earthquakes felt. But we're not hearing any reports of damage right now, right, Sam?
That is right. The Tennessee Emergency Management Agency did tweet just a few minutes ago, about 5 minutes ago, saying TEMA is working with our state, regional, and local partners to determine impacts and any needs out of an abundance of caution. But at this time, TEMA has not received any reports of damage or injuries. So again, this was a stronger earthquake than we're used to feeling. We typically feel around 2.2 magnitude, 2.0 magnitude earthquakes. They are not uncommon to this area. We do get earthquakes. We just a lot of times can't even feel them. What makes this a little unique is how strong it was. It was a 4.1 magnitude earthquake, but again, no reports of damage. Of course, we are asking around, and we will continue to update you on the latest. We did reach out to the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office. This did originate in Loudoun County, and the Sheriff's Office has told us that they also have no reports of damage or any injuries. Of course, we'll keep you updated on the latest, but we have received several calls into our station from our viewers across East Tennessee just minutes after that earthquake. 10 News reporter Maria Guzman shares what viewers felt from inside their homes.
It happened about 5 minutes ago at 9:05.
I'm sorry, I'm shaking up. It was an earthquake, a really bad one, the worst one I've ever been in.
And I had felt it on my feet.
We didn't know what was going on at first, but we heard booms, and it was shaking the house. And I went out in the cul-de-sac, and all my neighbors came out of their homes at the same time. And it was kind of a frightening experience.
We think we experienced an earthquake here in West Knoxville.
Off of Broadway, and I had felt and heard that earthquake. I heard everything rattle.
Our whole house rattled here in Pigeon Forge. My sister, who lives on Emerald in Knoxville, she called and said, "Oh my goodness, we had an earthquake."
Oh man, hearing those reactions. Aaron and I were actually on air when the earthquake happened, and we both felt it and weren't quite sure what was happening. So I'm glad we have those answers now. And we're about ready to get to hear some more answers. We're talking to Christine Powell. She's a professor emeritus at the University of Memphis. Christine, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Well, first off, can you just kind of break it down and tell us what an earthquake is? What happened this morning and what did we feel?
Okay. Well, there are, as Kent Moran said previously, places in the earth that are fractured or cracked. And when the two sides of those cracks sort of move relative to one another very slowly over very long time periods, like your hands rubbing together, eventually there's so much pressure there, on difference on either side, that this area breaks as a fault, and then you get an earthquake. It's a very slow process usually that requires the buildup of pressure for a very long time.
Okay, and we just heard some voicemails from people into our newsroom that sounded concerned. They were unsure of what happened because it was maybe a little scary for some people. And that's because we're not used to seeing magnitudes quite this strong. Is that right?
That's correct, particularly in the eastern Tennessee seismic zone. That is correct, yes.
Okay.
And could you possibly explain to us why or how people in other states felt this earthquake, how it traveled?
Okay, well, in the eastern United States, the earth is pretty solid. You know, you live on a rocky crust here that isn't all broken up by as many faults as, say, in California. So when we have an earthquake here, the energy that is released by that earthquake tends to travel very far. That's why when the big New Madrid earthquakes happened in 1811 and 1812, there were people who felt them in Boston, for example. And so that makes the earthquake hazard here in the eastern U.S. very high because, again, the energy travels very, very far.
That totally makes sense. And now earlier we called into our meteorologist, Cassie Nall. She's actually in Florida right now, but was able to give us a little bit of insight. And she was talking to us a little bit how a 4.1 magnitude earthquake, maybe for us here in East Tennessee, felt pretty strong. But if, for example, we were in California, maybe we wouldn't have had the same reaction. Can you kind of explain the differences in where we are in the United States and how that kind of might come into effect or come into play?
Yes, in the western U.S., the Earth is really cut up by many, many faults. It's on a plate boundary, and there's one plate moving with respect to the other, and so there are little earthquakes generated all the time, thousands. And people there, first of all, will not feel the energy from one earthquake as far as people here in the eastern U.S., so they don't have as much shaking and rattling from a comparably sized earthquake in California. Plus, people in California, for example, have become aware of earthquakes. And so when they do feel some shaking, it's not the same thing here as in the East, where we're totally unaware of what's going on. And I was struck by the reactions of the people that you recorded, particularly the first woman who spoke. I could hear the fear in her voice, and this makes our work important. In California, people, they're told about earthquakes all the time, and they're somewhat used to them. But here in the East Coast, where energy from even a 4 earthquake, magnitude 4, will travel pretty far, we are just not prepared mentally to understand what is going on. So it's very, very frightening.
Your work is so important, and we are so thankful that you've been able to talk with us. My next question is about what tools or sensors are used to detect and figure out what magnitude these earthquakes are?
Yes, we use seismic instruments that we have calibrated, and we know from the recordings that these instruments make. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there used to be pictures of a pen going up and down on a drum, and as high as the pen goes will tell you something about the size of the earthquake, how much energy is released. And it's the same thing now with the digital instruments. We know from how large the signals are recorded by these seismometers, how large the earthquake is. That's all as part of our magnitude scales that have been developed over the years very precisely.
Right. And I know that recording this work is so important. It is what you do, and Kent was talking to us a little bit about that and the importance of reporting. Now, the Central U.S. Earthquake Consortium has said, they sent out a tweet saying that so far more than 17,000 people have reported feeling that quake. Is that number something that is consistent with what you would expect? I guess, how does that compare? 17,000 seems like a lot of people. Of course, we were saying our phones were ringing off the hooks, and we've gotten a lot of emails. Is that typical here in East Tennessee?
Well, it would be, yeah, I think so for this magnitude earthquake. I think it's wonderful that people are reporting, because as Kent said, this goes into our database. Then we can use these reactions by people to further understand what this earthquake, how deep it was, how strong it was. We can add all this into our database, translating how people feel and the damage that earthquakes cause into a more reliable magnitude scale. So all of this is very, very important.
Right. And so for people who might still be concerned, who maybe, again, this morning was a little bit scary, a little frightening, maybe a little unexpected, what advice would you have to give to people? Is there anything that you think people should do or just be aware of? Or, is there no risk? Is everyone okay to just continue business as usual?
Well, yes, I think people can get on with their lives and continue what they do without worrying, but there may be aftershocks. This was a very deep earthquake, very unusually deep, but it still may produce some aftershocks. And so don't be afraid. If you feel a slight rumble, these aftershocks will probably be less in magnitude than this 4.1, so they'll be smaller earthquakes. But don't be alarmed if you still feel occasional shaking and your house seems to move around, everything. It's going to be okay. These are smaller earthquakes, they're aftershocks, and you should not be alarmed.
A really important message. And the National Weather Service in Morristown did say that fellow scientists at the USGS forecast only a 23% chance to see a magnitude 3 or higher aftershock within the week. And they say to remember that the scale is logarithmic, so a 3.0 is 10 times weaker than a 4.0, like what we experienced this morning. But that is certainly a good message that, again, 23% chance to see a magnitude 3 or higher within the week.
Yeah, and my next question is kind of about those aftershocks. Is there a time frame when we can kind of stop worrying about if one might occur? I know you said it would likely be weaker, but I'm just curious if there's a time when usually aftershocks occur.
Well, here in the East, they can occur for weeks after an earthquake of this size. I wouldn't be surprised if our instruments, which are very sensitive, would be recording aftershocks, say, even a month after this earthquake, but they wouldn't necessarily be felt by people. So the information that you got about the magnitude 3 is really critical for people living in the area. You may get a few 2s or something like that a few people might feel, but the risk from any further damage or anything coming from these aftershocks is really low. But as scientists, we will hopefully be recording some smaller events for weeks to a month or so from now.
Right. And Christine, the last question for you, we asked Kent this as well, but you mentioned that research and how you hope to be recording what's happening in the future. So why is that research important? Why does it matter, and how can people help with that?
Okay, people can help. Again, if you feel anything, go to Did You Feel It, or contact Kent or someone at Siri so we can record those observations. Why the aftershocks are important is that they can tell us something about the fault at depth. The earthquake occurs at a certain location, but if we have aftershocks moving away from that earthquake in a certain direction, for example, we might be able to tell more about how that fault is oriented. and that might give us more information about its size and its capacity to release energy. It will be very, very important for us to understand more about that fault at depth. And because it's so deep, we have no chance of seeing any surface breakage associated with that fault like you would see in California, for example. Our faults here they don't break the surface in most instances, and so we rely upon the aftershock data to tell us more about what is going on deep in the earth.
Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. To anyone watching, again, you do have the chance to contribute to that data and share your experiences by Googling "Did you feel it?" That's how you can find that and report that. Christine, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate your insight.
Thank you, Christine.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
All right. Well, you have a great day. And right now we are starting to get videos from our viewers. Again, we've been getting them all this morning, pretty much as soon as it started. And now we've had the chance to compile a few. So this is ring camera footage from Dylan Hawkins in Maryville, Tennessee. So look, everything seems to be still now on his ring video, but we know that earthquake is coming up in just a second. There you can see the shaking on the camera.
Yeah, and it gets more intense, as you can see.
Again, so that was in Maryville in Blount County. This originated in Loudoun County. It was about 12.4 miles southeast of Greenback, Tennessee, and there you can see it was felt in Maryville. Now we want to show you another video. This is from Sabrina Profit. So this is ring camera footage from her, and this is again in Maryville, Tennessee. It looks like showing maybe her front yard here. You can see that camera starting to shake, Erin.
Yep, yeah, it really, you can clear as day see it. It's just, sometimes you think that you may be the only one that felt something like that, but we are hearing from so many people that they heard things shaking around. It was just such a shock.
Yeah, and one thing that you might have heard as this was occurring was some sort of boom. So Erin and I were here. We were in the middle of our 9 o'clock newscast and we heard a boom that almost sounded like a car outside had somehow struck the building or something had happened. And if you heard a boom, that could have just been from the ceiling, some infrastructure shifting. But we have seen from some of our previous reporting in 2019 that typically you don't start to see any major damage to glass or anything like that until you get to a 4.4 magnitude earthquake. As a reminder, we got to a 4.1 magnitude earthquake as reported by the USGS. So thankfully there shouldn't be any major damage. Now this is video from Wendy Newton in the Rocky Hill area of Knoxville. It's a reaction from her dog right as that earthquake is happening. And that is something I heard from my friends as well who felt that earthquake this morning, is some of them, their animals reacted before they even felt it. Here you can see Kelly Edler and her dog seem to be reacting. So if for whatever reason your animals were maybe a little bit skittish this morning or maybe acting a little bit out of sorts, that could definitely be the reason. Now this was also from the Maryville area. Again, you can see those dogs.
Yeah, I mean, dogs certainly do not understand what's going on. You hear about them freaking out with thunderstorms, but the ground shaking under you, I mean, it startled both of us. And so we're sending people out to talk to you all about what today felt like. And again, thankfully, we have no damage reports.
Right.
So hopefully this can just go down as a very rare occurrence, going to tie in the top 5 strongest earthquakes felt here in East Tennessee.
And I do think we have a little bit of sound. We talked to Natalie Sladen, and she told us a little bit about what she was feeling like in the moments that the earthquake struck the area. Wow, I don't mean to laugh. That is so crazy. That was much louder than I expected. I had mentioned that Erin and I heard a boom earlier, and it was nothing like that.
No, that almost sounded like a bell. Perhaps
it did.
She has bells, but one thing we mentioned earlier is if perhaps you were having a late morning and you haven't really done a check around your home yet, very light objects could have fallen. We're really not expecting much damage, if any, to have occurred. Really the only thing is some startled animals, perhaps some startled humans, and maybe some light objects.
Yes, and that was what Kent Moran from the University of Memphis was telling us, was maybe if you had something on the edge of a shelf kind of dangling precariously towards the edge, that maybe that could have fallen off the shelves. But again, no major damage reports, no injuries that are being reported so far. We have reached out to local law enforcement. But this is from Diana Britton. It's a video from outside her home, and look at that camera shaking. Oh my goodness. That is really crazy to see. And again, that does seem to be the story for people all across our area, even into Georgia. I know Aaron's heard from people in Georgia that have said that they could feel it. We got an email from, I think it was Morganton, Georgia, saying that they also felt it for about 20 seconds. And then here's our weather porch from the station. So there you can see it was right outside, and we were able to go back and find that footage. And again, Aaron and I were here sitting right where we are now. We were in a story, and so unfortunately we don't have the video from our cameras actually shaking here in the newsroom because we weren't on camera at the time. However, they really were shaking apparently. We heard our producers and our director in the back saying that they saw the camera shake, and we all certainly felt it here in the station in Knoxville.
Yeah, I think, Sam, one thing I will take away from this is the sounds we were talking about. It's just things that, you know, don't usually shake in your home or in the TV studio, the light shaking. That was really what was most startling, which led us to believe there was almost an accident outdoors and some sort of impact. Earthquake was really not what came to my mind first, because one of this magnitude, 4.1, is just not very common around here.
Exactly, and that's what Christine Powell with the University of Memphis was saying, was that when she was listening to some of the voicemails that we got, and even just listening to our reaction, I think this startled a lot of people in the area. But the important thing to remember is that this was stronger than the magnitudes that we usually feel, but this area is prone to earthquakes. We usually see earthquakes that are around the 2.0 magnitude, maybe a little bit higher, but not something that you would necessarily feel. And so this is not entirely out of the ordinary. And in fact, we actually had a stronger magnitude earthquake in 2018.
Looking at this map of earthquakes may give you anxiety, but Dr. Robert Hatcher, a UT professor emeritus of geology, says we don't need to panic.
No, I would not be worried.
He says this recent string of earthquakes doesn't necessarily mean a bigger one is coming. In fact, he says that's unlikely because the earthquakes don't show a pattern.
Why not? Because they're sort of diffuse. They were the one at Decatur is not lined up with anything of the others that have occurred. These earthquakes are sort of here, there, and yonder. It's sort of a random occurrence of earthquakes.
He says we live in the eastern Tennessee seismic zone. That's completely separate from the New Madrid seismic zone. That's in the western part of the state, and he says that's the most active seismic zone in this part of the country. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, in 1812, an at least 7 magnitude earthquake in the New Madrid area reversed the direction of the Mississippi River. Dr. Hatcher says if that were to happen today, we would feel it here in East Tennessee and see damage.
Oh, absolutely. You'd feel it and there would be damage. You would see it.
Dr. Hatcher says you can't predict an earthquake, but he knows we live in an active zone.
We know there has to be one or more active faults in the deep crust producing earthquakes. Earthquakes are produced by active faults, by elastic energy being released along the fault.
And that is what happened this morning. As a reminder, that happened at 9:05 Eastern Time. USGS reports that there was a 4.1 magnitude earthquake. It was about 12.4 miles southeast of Greenback, Tennessee. That's in Loudoun County.
Yeah, just something that will certainly go down in the records, and if we continue to get no very damaging reports, this is something we can look back on lightly. You know, this does not happen often. I'm very thankful that we safely got to experience something like this. And as I mentioned, earthquake was not first to come to mind, so I'm sure lots of people today felt just surprising shocks, and we hope that you'll send us more video footage, or if you saw any damage yourself, any photos as well, we would really appreciate it.
Exactly. And just to reiterate, so far we've reached out to different local law enforcement agencies, including Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, where this originated, and there has not been any damage, no injuries. Of course, we are finding the latest information, and if that changes, we will update you both on air and online at WBIR.com. Now, again, we want to see your videos. We want to hear your experiences. So far, we've had people calling into the newsroom and saying they described the earthquake as feeling like a semi-truck hit their house. Like I said earlier, that's what I had thought happened. happened here. And then also like a low flying plane shook everything. So those are some of the experiences that we're hearing from people. But of course, we want to hear from you. We want to keep hearing different people's experiences. So if you have any Ring camera footage that you want to share with us, please do. We also will have continued coverage on this in our 6 o'clock show tonight. And here's an update from the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency, which again says at this time, TEMA has not received any reports of damage or injuries. We are continuing to ask questions about that, and we will update you on the latest. And then in terms of what this means for the future, we do know that there is a reported 23% chance of aftershocks over the next week or so. That's reported by the National Weather Service in Morristown. But for the latest continued coverage, you can watch our 6 o'clock show. That is 10 News Weekend starting at 6 tonight for all the latest on this 4.1 magnitude earthquake.